for Fortune 50 companies and entrepreneurs, and the New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Entrepreneur. With over 2 decades of expertise helping companies bring innovative products to the market, he blends agile design thinking and lean methodologies to ignite entrepreneurial action with large organizations. Brant is a sought-after keynote speaker, startup mentor, and trusted executive advisor. He speaks around the world on organizational agility, digital transformation, and how to refocus missions on creating value. Learn more at brantcooper.com. In conversation with him is Jason Saltzman, a seasoned entrepreneur and business writer, contributing to several business publications such as Inc., Entrepreneur Media, and Forbes. His work has been published in many places like the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and CNN. Please welcome Brant and Jason. And as they're coming on, we do want to say, courtesy of Brant, we have a book giveaway. So if you haven't purchased your book, we have Catherine K. If you are here, you have been selected to win a book through Brant and his team at Moves the Needle. I will email you who you need to email. So be on the lookout, Catherine K. Congratulations. Brant and Jason, welcome. Sorry that I stumbled over your bios. It's been a long day. You have so much expertise. I'm going to turn it over to both of you, and I will hop on out. Thank you,
Thank
Brant
you,
and Jason.
Adam.
Awesome.
You, Adam,
Thank
you did a wonderful job. You did a wonderful. You should have said the other Cooper after you said Anderson Cooper is going to be on. Here's the other Cooper, because that's what I was thinking.
All week,
This is Anderson Cooper's brother.
Cooper. This is the Brant Cooper. All right, everyone.
This is the Cooper, and I am so honored that Brant called me up and hit me up and asked me to moderate this talk, because we've been friends for many years. I started one of my companies a decade ago, and he was one of the very first speakers to come and bless our new space in the middle of Manhattan. And I'm now coming to you guys from Boulder, Colorado, and I want to make Brant look amazing. So I'm going to do everything. He already is amazing, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about him, get some great stuff about this out, as well as get down to the nitty gritty.
Those were amazing times.
Weren't
Jason,
they?
Back in the
Weren't
day.
they?
I mean, that was coming out of the Great Recession, which means that there's a boom of entrepreneurialism, and we're seeing it again now, right? And those were the days where I think New York City startup scene was sort of put on the map.
That's right. It was just getting started. Everybody wanted to be together. And oddly enough, the company had pivoted over the years. And the first person that I called to do my massive partnership with Verizon was Brant, because I'm like, these people, this huge company needs to know how to innovate, and I need your help. And you came in, you were like, you are so screwed. But that's what, it's full circle. And now we're here to talk about that, right? We're here to talk about it. And I want to know something I've been thinking about. You know, you speak all over the world. You know, I've been lucky enough to have you speak at my offices to our community of entrepreneurs a few times about lean development, lean entrepreneurship, based on your last book. What about innovation gets you? Like, why are you writing about innovation? Like, what about the subject matter like moves you enough to devote a big portion of your life to it?
Yeah. So, you know, when I left college, I couldn't imagine myself getting a sort of a regular job, a 9-to-5 job. And I wanted to live a life that was sort of my own design. And yet, you know, there wasn't, entrepreneurship was something I never even considered. It's not really what I thought of. It wasn't as hip as it was now. And so I was actually pretty perplexed by all of that. And I actually lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. And I was working there, and I would sit on the front stoop of my home in Clarendon, Virginia. And I would go like, man, is this what it is? Is this the rest of my life? Is like just, you know, working 9 to 5? And I didn't want it. And sort of amusingly, you know, I ended up leaving my girlfriend there, and it was like it was like straight out of a noir movie. You know, I left her on a train platform because I was taking a train back home to San Diego from across the country, and tearful,
like looking in the rear view,
exactly right, the tearful woman on the train platform.
Oh man.
But so I remember even telling her at that time, back, you know, in this pre-.com era, that like, no, I think people should be able to live the lives that they want to live. And she's all like, you know, you're speaking from a point of view of privilege, and there's absolutely no way that everybody's going to be able to do that. And she's totally 100% right. And I do recognize the privilege that I've had in my life, but it was still something that I was desirous. I wanted to pursue. And it wasn't until I ended up in the Bay Area and started working in startups that I saw that there was actually this entrepreneurial spirit that young companies actually can provide their employees. And so after a couple of years of working where managers were tossing me around like a hot potato because I didn't want to do things the way they wanted them done, I wanted to do things my own way. It wasn't until I stumbled into startups where that's the expected behavior that I sort of started thinking about this duality of execution-minded people and sort of this exploration-minded people. And really, you know, it's kind of funny. I'm sure you can do this in your life when you can look back at your life and it seems like it's all over the map, and then you can find this thread that runs through your life. And that is my thread, is this duality of execution stuff, things that you know you have to get done, and this creativity and inspiration and these elements that I call the entrepreneurial spirit, or lots of people call entrepreneurial spirit or innovation spirit, and how we need that as a balance in our lives. And you know, I say often that, you know, we're born that way. We're born with this creativity and admitting when we don't know, and learning mode. You know, we don't know how to walk, we don't know how to talk, and naturally, remember, we tell our kids, you know, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And then by the time they're like trying to get into college, if they're not, you know, acing their tests, and if they're not, you know, completely forgetting all failure, no failure, you've got to be, you know, perfect, you know. So then we get into the companies, and it's all this execution mindset, and everybody's afraid of failure, and they're afraid to admit when they don't know, and they're afraid of, you know, showing vulnerability to colleagues or employees or to leaders. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves. And I talk about this stuff and I write about it because we live in an age where we need to bring back that, you know, childlike creativity and that entrepreneurial spirit. We need to do that in order to benefit the world. We need to do it to benefit ourselves. And so that's why I do it, is because I think that we can teach companies how to unleash that spirit. And what you get are employees that are happier and more productive. And maybe we can get these companies to then compete on creating value for consumers again, for their customers. And if companies are competing on creating value, then guess what that does? That actually improves people's lives. It's the promise of capitalism, right?
So you said a lot. So I want to
did.
unpack it a little bit. So it's a beautiful thing because I know where you're coming from. And I know that you've worked with some of the largest companies in the world, and you've sat with them internally, and you've got some vulnerability. But let me ask you a double-sided question. Where do you see the start? How do companies have to start to get there? Because you have behemoths, Fortune 50s, Fortune 10s, that have all this infrastructure packed on culture. And you know as well as I do, it's like Game of Thrones to get anything done, to get even one line item across the finish line. So how do you go in there and shake things up? And the other side is, because it's you coming in from the outside, how do you get them to listen to you?
Yeah. So, you know, there are fundamental requirements, right? So one fundamental requirement is that you have to have people in there that get it. And every single big company has people in there that get it. They have leadership that gets it. They don't necessarily know how to get it done, but they recognize the need. There's probably not a Fortune 500 CEO you could talk to that wouldn't say, yes, we need to move faster. And yes, we need to listen to our customers better. And yes, we need to be more agile. In other words, being able to change course or change what we're up to, quickly. And so I think that when you start talking about those things in those ways, I think you get very little argument. I think that the problem is that they don't know how to do it. And so they often rely on big consulting firms, or they rely on, sort of just this cheerleading aspect of like, yeah, we're going to go be innovative. And maybe even part of the problem is using words like innovation that are, mean different things to everybody in the company, or they catch on to this digital transformation buzz, right? And they're like, yeah, we got to go create mobile apps. Our refrigerator's got to order food when we're out of food. And we start concentrating or focusing on technology rather than what we really need, which is that mindset that I was talking about earlier. So you asked how to get started. You have to have the leaders that get it. And then the other part of it, and to me, it's sort of this pincer move. You need these things happening as close to the same time as possible, is you have to change ground up behavior. And this is the biggest challenge, is that leaders want to do it top down. And so they tell the people they manage, and those people, tell those layers, and it's, you're trying to push it down. And by the time you get to the ground level, they're all like, oh man, this year's flavor of innovation, what a waste of time. I'm clocking out here at 5:30. So you have to have that buy-in, but you actually have to get the behavior change ground up. And that's really the work that we did. We don't try to compete with the strategy consultant firms. That's fine. Yeah, you guys want more money and you want bigger market share. I get it. Okay, so but the transformation happens from the ground level up, and I think that my optimistic take is every single big company has those people already. I think that they can leverage outside help. They can leverage outside expertise if they wish to, but they already have human-centered design people. They have people that work in an agile way. They have people with startups on the side. They have people with those entrepreneurial spirit.
They required startups. Whole
That's right.
Teams of startups.
That's right. And all of these people just want the go ahead. They want the permission to go and start behaving this way. And so that's the pincer move that gets things started.
But okay, so we only have 30 minutes. You and I could talk about this for 100 hours, right? But you have problems that are deep rooted, other than just people wanting to make change inside organizations. The structure of job title, right? The structure of an organization, an org chart that has to function in a certain level to get anything done at all. And what is set up to be an operational org chart can also be the biggest enemy of a company. And then you have things like R&D teams, open innovation teams, skunk work teams, lab teams. We've all seen them. Where do you cross the line between innovation theater and really punching through that org chart to make ridiculous amounts of change? How do you come disruption proof?
Yeah. So my sort of my radical method, which really isn't that radical, is to do things like hackathons. It's like you just start with the behavior. So you don't sit there and try to plan it all out. You don't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. You don't push it into a silo. There's this whole mythology around, breaking up your company into 95% execution mode and 5% exploration mode. And you go assign, a dozen people to go do breakthrough innovation. I mean, it just doesn't work. There's no evidence that works. And instead, what you want to do is take those operational people, you take the core business people, you take some of the R&D people, and you say, listen, we're going to do a weekend of trying to solve internal problems. Like, the leadership has problems. They have things that keep them up at night. There's, the design group isn't getting along with the manufacturing floor. There's these inefficiencies over here. We've been wrestling with how to improve this product over here. We haven't tested this market over here, and we've been meaning to do that. So there's a bunch of internal challenges that you can face down over a weekend where you're not solving the problems, you're gathering evidence for a particular solution to that problem. And the more evidence that you can gather is how then you get funding to go and try to solve those problems. And the key is that, and this is why it's not really typically innovation, is that you're solving challenges that have near-term impact. And by choosing challenges that have near-term impact, leadership goes, okay, wow, we actually do have the people that can do this. And two, they're like, wow, this actually works. Like, these people are acting agile, they're running experiments, they're understanding their stakeholders, their internal customers, they're understanding what their needs are. Wow, this stuff actually works. And then hopefully, if you do this enough, you drive some internal impact. So Intuit got started this way, and within 3 months they had generated, I don't know, what they called $10 million worth of impact. And over the course of several years, that grew to over $100 million of impact through 100 days of running these type of internal, what I call impactathons. And so they're not expensive. They're not, they take away, if you do it during the workday, you're taking away from other projects, which is always a big problem. But it's not this huge monolithic top-down program that feels, like trying to turn the Titanic.
Yeah, because I know the space too well, right?
Right.
So I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate. I agree with you, by the way. This should be common cultural practice to think outside the box and have a safe space to iterate on ideas and bring culture together in a different format. But the problem is that I see, like, hackathons sort of, for lack of a better term, get bastardized in the version that, you're referring to, where they become this big, because it becomes the big shiny object that you could put in front of the CEO's face, right? Because we're innovative, because we're a 300-year-old company having a hackathon, where last year a hackathon we thought was illegal, but now it's cool, right? So how do you stop that? Okay, we dealt with that, right? 10 years ago, we dealt with, it's legal, it's cool. Now you're dealing with the whole other thing where it's like, it's just theater. How do you make it not theater?
Yeah. Well, so the thing is that, again, it's focused on driving impact, right? So you're doing it in such a way that leadership actually sees an improvement in productivity, or they see some sort of bump somewhere. It doesn't have to be cold hard cash. It has to see, you have to get the leaders to see that it isn't a threat to execution mode. It actually makes execution mode work more efficiently. And it's not a hackathon. I don't want people sitting around coding. I want people to actually it's an impactathon. And so what their whole job is to move the needle. Their whole job is to demonstrate and practice the behavior of developing empathy for customers, running experiments, using evidence, pitching out the stories in order to get leaders to understand this. And so it only becomes theater if that's as far as you go. And so there's a number of companies that have these type of things that are permanent in their companies, which I think is amazing. It's great. And it actually does drive improvement in revenue, but that's just step one. And so, kind of the lowest hanging fruit are idea competitions. And I don't like those idea competitions and pitch competitions and Shark Tanks, where it's leaders that are picking ideas and nobody has to generate any evidence. That's all, to me, that's innovation theater from the start. But if you start giving the time and space and safety for those teams to start developing the evidence for those ideas, now you're actually acting more like a real startup. I mean, right? Startups, if you're not a serial entrepreneur, you don't get money from investors anymore because you had a good idea. That was the .com era. Now you actually have to prove something first. And so that's what we're trying to emulate, that part of it. But that, again, that's just our kickstart phase in order to demonstrate that you can drive impact and demonstrate that you actually have the abilities inside the company to behave this way. The next step is more difficult, right? So that's kind of the accelerate phase in the book. And that's where there's a number of different ways to do it, but like there's a couple examples in the book of companies going like, okay, we see as a market opportunity, it's already been proven, Cargill example, it's already been proven that alternative proteins is a real market, right? You don't have to go off and do interviews with customers and ask them if they want, vegetarian patties that they can make at home. I mean, it's already proven. But what they can bring is all of this other expertise, technology and distribution, and all of these other things that made them such a large, successful company. And so then they pull a team together, and they pull the team from the business units and from R&D and from business development, and they form a team, and then even a team of teams that actually decides what they're going to do and partners even with startups and does whatever it takes in order to create a new business. And they do it in a startup fashion, but they're starting in a scale up phase. They're not starting in, sort of the ideation phase. But the nature of them taking cross-functional, interdisciplinary teams that spread across the company is a way for them to emulate sort of the scale-up phase of a scaling startup, right? It's still got then that balance between continuing to explore how do we get this big enough so that it becomes a permanent business unit versus the execution. Hey, this is what we've already figured out, and so we need to start, ramping up the processes in order to figure that stuff out. So there's a number of examples of companies that have done the acceleration phase that way. The other part of the acceleration phase is starting to put the plan in place. So we skipped the plan at the beginning because we wanted to just practice the behavior. And now you create like an internal team. It could be, the Intuit calls theirs innovation catalysts, and ING had a PACE group, and, you brand the program so that it's not just called innovation, or it's not called agile transformation, or it's not called digital things, design thinking. It's its own entity that belongs to the company, right? It's not McKinsey's approach. It's not Boston Consulting Group. You're taking the expertise, but you're creating your own program. You define your own entrepreneurial spirit, and you start pushing it into the business units, and you're the center of excellence, and you're teaching people how to do it, and you're giving them resources and templates and all of these things to sort of support that behavior. And you do that. And again, it actually could take years in that phase until there's enough impact where the business units go like, now I understand it. Now I get it, that even in my core business, I face a bunch of uncertainty. And in order to overcome the uncertainty, I need the exploration part of the equation. I can't just do the execution stuff. I ask people all the time, did core businesses of big companies simply execute through COVID? No, because their markets were completely upended. Their small businesses lost their budget. The consumers weren't buying anymore. Yeah. You can't just execute. You can't just do everything that you were doing pre-COVID. You have to go into that exploration mode. That's not the innovation group. That's the core business that has to figure out how to overcome those obstacles.
So, Brant, I feel like there's so much here. I obviously wish we had more time. We have more time. I'm hitting you up at, but let's just say our audience today, right, is probably either somebody who's starting a new company or somebody that's working for a really large company, right? There's a lot of that probably that wants to know. Let's go on that for a second. I love everything you say because I know it's true and real. And what you just said is brilliant because it manifests core change. And I'm sure there's all these things in the book that list things out and break things down on a sort of granular level to execute. But let's say you're that person. You want to be an agent of change. You're working for a large organization. You're at the developer or under position in the company, and you're not C-suite, so you can't just write the check. How do you get you in the company? How do you introduce you into the company? This is great. I need this. My company needs this. You're speaking to me. This sucks. We need. I want to be an agent. How do I get you?
Well, normally I think it would be pretty difficult. Now you could just form a book club and go find some budget to buy a bunch of books, and then I'll come in and talk. You know, just like, so do a lunch and learn or a book club.
That's practical. That's practical. Just buy. That's why we're here. Let's sell some books here.
Yeah. No, but generally, what I counsel people to do is go find the like-minded people. Like, so start a, you know, a bi-weekly or a monthly, you know, lean innovation happy hour, or call it whatever you want. I'm so hung up on the word innovation.
It's
I don't want to use
though.
Yeah.
But no, I see what you're saying. Like take the initiative. Like, don't just sit there and bitch.
Yeah.
You know, start something social. And
well, the
anything,
thing is also that's how you
together.
find the budget. Because if you actually expand it enough where you're trying to find like-minded people, and you maybe these days you're still just doing it by Zoom, you can bring in speakers for that. You can turn that into a book club. You can just have, you know, bring in different people, different points of view. And eventually what you'll do is you'll have somebody in that meeting that has budget. And what they're going to do is maybe fund running some experiments, or maybe they would fund bringing somebody in. It doesn't have to be me. There's tons of people that know how to do this stuff. Or
but not McKinsey.
You know, yeah, right. Well, the person that's in that room probably doesn't have the budget for McKinsey, but you know, Intuit started very much as Skunk Works, and it was Ben Blank who just started doing their version of the Impackathons on weekends. And they would just like, so you start by doing a happy hour and then just say, hey, let's get together on the weekend and let's tackle some issues that we think can be solved. And so you're doing this without permission, right? It's not an official thing. You're just like, we can improve the business if we did X, Y, Z. And you find 5 or 6 people that have ideas. And that's what you do over the weekend, is you go and build evidence for that ideas. And you do that over a couple of weekends and you have enough evidence. And then you go to a leader with budget and you say, we talked to 25 customers and they acted this way and they did this, and here's the evidence. And we think that we should do X, Y, Z. But now at this point, we need a little bit of budget to take the next experiment. And you only get money based upon the success of your experiments, not based upon, you know, oh, well, I'm asking for, you know, my budget for next year for, you know, $10 million to go play with a bunch of ideas. It's really getting into that mindset that I'm only going to get budget if I actually produce the evidence.
I love it's so practical. And I hope who's ever watching this right now really listens, because I think some people, and working within large organizations, I just the culture itself, people are afraid 90% of the time to just step up with an idea, you know, so having practical, but if you want to live your life not being a robot, and you absolutely want to be an agent of change, because we need you, because from the outside,
totally true.
A lot of stuff, you know, you need advocates, you know, so I love the practical advice. Thank you. I can't wait to pick up the book myself, because you've always mentored me in the right way. I was able to partner with some really large organizations with a good head on my shoulders with your advice. So I appreciate you for that. So I urge everybody who wants to be an agent of change to pick up this book and ask some questions. We have some going on right now. So why don't I start from the audience questions, and we can get started on that. So Seth asks, how can you change, you know, we spoke about this, like how can you change ground up behavior by words or by example?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's got to be by doing. And so the you know, again, it depends on your level inside the organization. If you actually have a team that you manage, then to me it's building in, you know, I'm a big fan of you know, Kanbans or agile practices, where agile refers to the original principles of the manifesto. Mm-hmm. But I like the idea of having a team that's planning out what they're going to work on, and you build exploration into the sprint. You build exploration into your regular work. And again, I think that my goal here is for leaders to see that it actually improves execution. It doesn't take away from execution.
Yeah.
It's sort of like back in the lean manufacturing days, the whole concept of continuous improvement. You know, that was the way that you worked. It wasn't a different way of working than execution. If you ran into a problem you solve the problem. You don't patch it. You don't just do a workaround, because if the patches and the workarounds grow over time, then you have sort of this catastrophic failure, and whatever the systems are down for a long time. And so you actually, in continuous improvement, you want to, when you come across a problem, you solve it. And we don't really do that here in the West. When we come across a problem, we want to like get away from it as quickly as possible.
You say that to me, and I heard you say that a few times. Can you elaborate? Like, what about if we're the West and we don't do it right? Who does it right?
Well, I don't know who's doing what I'm talking about right. That's specifically in Japan, in Toyota production system, which is what the lean manufacturing was based upon. Their idea was that, this is going way back to like building cars in the 50s. Their idea was, in order to maximize the uptime of your manufacturing plant, was to stop manufacturing and solve problems when you encountered them, because it made the system itself more resilient. What I've read, that a lot of the Western companies, their idea of maximizing uptime was never turn the machine off. And so that meant that you're penalized if you turn it off. And so if you run into a problem, you're just jerry-rigging things in order to keep it.
Yeah, you put a Band-Aid on a gusher.
That's right. And so then
it reminds me of the movie Gung Ho. You remember that movie?
No.
Oh man, this is weird. Michael Keaton, younger than us. Way young. But I hear you. If you're not systemically solving the problem and you're not fixing it throughout the whole ecosystem, what are you really solving?
Yeah. So there was so maybe another practical example is this company that we worked with that does manufactures clothes, and they do high-end outdoor equipment. And part of their process for some of their outdoor, their gloves and whatnot, they bought all this digital fabrication equipment, including 3D software and digital cutters and digital sewers. It's all really pretty extraordinary. But the company didn't see any ROI from investing in all this equipment, because the processes that the human beings went through was pretty much the same. In other words, the design team interacted with the manufacturing floor in the exact same way after the investment in the software and hardware. And so in 2 days, just based upon us, starting conversations, like we said, okay, design, you're going to act like the startup. Manufacturing floor, you're the customer. And we teach them how to develop empathy, how to run experiments, iterate until they get to a place where, oh my gosh, suddenly they're completely reinvented the way that they work together in 2 days. Right. But people don't stop and think about the interactions of human beings in those ways. And so that's a very simple way. You could, at one of those impackathons, solve some sort of efficiency issue in 2 freaking days, because you're actually taking the time to go develop the empathy and run experiments and use evidence to make decisions. And so it's this idea that, okay, we're going to switch, we're going to put on our entrepreneur hat and solve a problem. I don't care how big or small the problem is. But I can't do it with my execution hat on, because the execution hat means I'm using best practices. I'm using what worked yesterday. Even if it doesn't work anymore, that's the only thing I'm allowed to use. And so for people out there, how you get going is find like-minded people, find some challenge that you can work on, whether it's on your own time or it's got some sort of internal funding because you've gone to a leader and the leader says, heck yeah, if you solve this problem, darn right, I'm going to pay for it. Then you started the process. And that's the biggest step, is that first step of running those experiments and presenting evidence to the stakeholder of whatever challenge it is you're working on.
Yeah, I love that. But I also think, as a practical matter, you have to make a personal decision. We've spoken about this in the past. If you're not getting through and nothing works, you kind of have to walk away. If you're never going to be an agent of change and you're never going to fill your passions, you have to know you have to walk away too, right?
Well, yeah. And maybe now, I don't know, it's a crazy time out there. There's companies are poaching poaching professionals from other companies all over the place just based upon whether they allow remote work or not. But I just do think that there's a rise in this spirit. I think that, I didn't set out to write a COVID book, but COVID to me really brings this home. COVID is not the last disruption that's going to ripple through our economy. This is going to be ongoing. Ransomware attacks here in San Diego and other places, and energy grid collapse, and the ship getting stuck in a canal that disrupts global supply chains. I mean, we're so interconnected. This is what the digital age is. We're so interconnected that these ripples are going to continue throughout our businesses. And so we just have to be agile. We have to be able to understand what, the needs and desires of our customers and other stakeholders are. We have to be able to move quickly. And that's really the basis of the book. That's what disruption proof is being resilient, being able to weather all of these storms, this increased awareness about what's going on, both with our internal people, our colleagues and our employees, and even with, empathy for leaders, and then dynamically being able to change based upon new information. Something's happening. We need to think about changing our plans. And so that's sort of the cadence of agile that I like.
I love it, and I have a million questions, but I want to give it back to the audience. We can talk for a million hours, Brant. So Paul asks, you often hear good ideas are 10 a penny. How do you measure success? When do you measure success? Is there a danger in measuring too soon, or is measuring part of the process?
Yeah, measuring is part of the process, and it's really hard, right? So this is something that that startups get and investors get, because generally they both know that they're not going to achieve their desired outcomes this year or even 5 years. It's probably more likely 10 years, right? So investors and startup founders know how to measure the progress towards the desired outcomes. But because businesses are in execution mode, they measure tasks over time. So how many times does somebody do something? Because historically, if we have a team of people and they're all doing these tasks and they're able to do it within a particular time frame, and we aggregate all of that information, we know we'll achieve these particular revenues. Again, it's a more simple time. It's an execution mindset, and really it was highly relevant in the manufacturing world that marked the dominance of the industrial age. But it's just, there's so much uncertainty and complexity now that we have to be able to come up with metrics that measure the progress towards the desired outcome. So it's not measuring what we're doing, it's measuring what the effect is that we're having. And so almost always that's related to the behavior of our stakeholders. So I'm even including customers in our stakeholders, right? So if you're developing any product or service, essentially what you're doing is they're asking somebody to change their behavior. They're doing something now, and you're going to give them something, and you want them to use what you're giving them. And so you can think of almost all projects or internal initiatives. It's the same thing. You want people to change their behavior. And so what you're measuring is how many people have changed their behavior permanently, right? So hopefully I'm not being too esoteric here, but if you think about a SaaS product, or let's even think about YouTube, you could say YouTube's metric back when they were first starting out would be people that are engaged with our platform, upload a video and share it with 100 of their friends 2 times a week. So I've just starts out maybe as a hypothesis, but I have the means of measuring that. And so what I'm trying to figure out when I'm first getting started, week 1, I need 1 person that does that. Week 2, I need that first person to continue, but I also need 5 new people that are actually doing that, right? So you're measuring whole numbers of people that have changed their behavior. And eventually that gets to, I'm seeing 10% month over month growth of my active users, right? And so you can start, I know you're actually picking up on this. You can start figuring out then, well, what are all of those other metrics that go around with that, right? You start looking at other parts of the funnel and you say, okay, what's my cost of getting those people on board? What's my lifetime value of those people because of advertising dollars that are coming in? but it starts very simply. The people that love my product behave in what way? People that are engaged with my innovation program behave in what way? So we have to get to the customer, the stakeholder journey side of it. What is the behavior that indicates that they're getting value from whatever it is that I'm doing?
You know, and at the root of what you're saying, it sounds overwhelmingly expensive to think about from a company-wide perspective. But when you look at the historic data on change, the adverse to what you're talking about is obsolescence.
Right.
Because
exactly
you could have a great friggin' product 100 years ago. And if you're not changing and being disruption proof to a point that you're making, then you're setting yourself up for obsolescence. And that's way more expensive to you, your shareholders, and everybody else for not doing things like what you're suggesting.
No, I mean, it'll take a long time, but I fundamentally believe that companies that don't change will go out of business. I mean, it's just, again, the world moves too fast.
Yes.
To work as if everybody's on an assembly
and
line.
Opportunities for startups, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, and the other thing that I try to get people to imagine, including the leaders, is that the new business emerges from within the old. It's not that a snake eats its own tail. It's that the snake sheds its skin and it becomes it's new again. It's not that an external startup is going to come in, or you're going to buy an external startup and it's not all of this disruption stuff. It's this core change inside the business where the people with entrepreneurial spirit, or people that understand this balance between execution and exploration, are going to drive the change, because eventually they're going to have a bigger impact than the people are just executing on the old way of doing it.
You know what? I just came to a realization about this conversation.
Okay.
I don't want you to sell this book. I just realized what I'm dealing. I'm dealing with the devil here. Well, it's like the theory of like people that were very upset with Bruce Lee for teaching the Westerners kung fu, right? You're teaching the evil, how to, but
Jason,
I understand.
You can just buy all of the books.
Yeah, and get there first.
Yeah.
You get that. I'm trying. My big bet is that you're right on everything. My big bet being in startup is that we can absolutely do it quicker than how long this would take. Because you're right. Everything you said is spot on. It's a culture shift. And you know it.
Yeah.
You have to really, and there's a lot of that happening, right? You have a lot of companies that are really starting to look at the bigger picture on more than just bottom line. Things like double bottom lines never existed before like they do now.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think that enough of these disruptions are going to roll through that people have to think about not measuring efficiency just based upon financial efficiency, but it's efficiency in creating value for customers, right? So if we move the goalpost just down just that little bit, people optimize what they measure. And so if we were measuring things other than just pure finance, right? So to me, the example is, even while I was going through treatment, the hospital system that I was involved with got hit by a ransomware attack. So the treatment stopped, right? For weeks.
Tell me.
And so the thing is that's insane, right? So think about all of our institutions that are connected to the internet, and so thereby vulnerable to ransomware attacks. And the value creation stops because of a ransomware attack. Well, think about if we were measuring based upon that value that was being created instead of by the financial efficiency, then the choices in how we build the network and the IT infrastructure and the redundancy and the failover, all of those things are looked at differently if we move that goalpost down just a couple of notches. And so I do think that businesses are going to have to start thinking that way. And I also guess, I hope your startup, succeeds wildly, but even for a startup like yours, where he's helping, by the way, helping people in financial distress get out of that. I don't know how you would describe it, Jason, probably better than me, but the acquisition is still a huge part of the startup scene, and I think that that's fine. But the change that I'm talking about would also mean that those big companies would be able to acquire companies and keep the culture of the acquired company, and even
Huge problem.
right,
Huge
and
problem.
even be able to be able to keep that ethos going and not
Yeah.
destroy that startup that they acquired.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how too often a company gets acquired and you see it in the press and then the company's gone.
Yeah.
It's just gutted. The product sucks. The people are gone. They just leave. And that's just because they didn't sign up for that culture.
Right.
They found themselves, they wanted to be motivating and doing things different. And we have a bunch of questions, and I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to randomly shoot some off here. So we're speaking about manufacturing. So we have a question here. Who do you believe the leaders are in manufacturing technique today? We talk about the West, but is the West even valid to have in that conversation? The person says, let's say Canada. Is Canada doing the same thing, or Finland, for example? What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on whether you're talking about it at scale now. So number one, the U.S. suffers because we don't have industrial policy, and so we should. And during the heyday of the industrial age, we had a very strong industrial policy, and the industrial policy means that there's core technology and core abilities that we sort of demand that we're going to keep domestic, right? There's a security angle to it. There's also an employment angle to it. And also when there's disruptions, there's a supply chain angle to it. And so I think that you're, again, sort of seeing big businesses go like, well, wait a second, we need to take a look at this. But the problem is that, sort of this whole libertarian laissez-faire mindset has convinced everybody that the government is incapable of doing things like industrial policy. And it's just not true. There's tons of super smart people that know how to develop these type of policies, and we need that. But on a smaller scale, there's amazing manufacturing that's going on in the US. It's just not at scale. And a matter of fact, one of the craziest things that you learn when you start diving into that is that, everybody bemoans the loss of manufacturing jobs. These people that are running domestic manufacturing can't find workers. They can't find the skilled workers to work in manufacturing. So how insane is that?
Yep.
Right. So on the one hand, we complain about the loss of all of these jobs. And on the other hand, we actually don't keep the workforce up to date with the skills that they need. And so these manufacturing companies are creating their own training programs, which actually might be the right approach. I'm not sure it's our responsibility to create this labor force, but I just think it's like insane that there's these disparities out there. But US actually has amazing manufacturing. It's just not at scale because we've allowed the outsourcing of all of that, which gets back to not having an industrial policy, and also this idea that managing based upon financial efficiency is the only way to look at efficiency, meant that offshoring was better than keeping onshoring. And so, people just like are wary, and I understand this, of getting government involved, but government needs to, they make the rules of the system. And we need to look at whether the system is producing the desired outcomes or not. And what we tend to do is play around with the outcomes, which is kind of a zero-sum game. Everybody perceives it as being robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's why there's so much politics involved. But really, you make systemic changes. You increase the power of workers and the power of consumers. And the balance of the equilibrium starts shifting again. And I think that you'll see a return of manufacturing and a turn of an increased wages and all of these things that balance the system more. But it requires government action. It requires government to enforce existing antitrust laws. It requires the government to enforce regulations that protect our resources, the environment, protects labor rights. And I'm not necessarily talking about old school unions either. They all need this new mindset as well. To be honest, it's everybody that needs it, all of these institutions. But the government has a bigger role to play here in order to make the system more equitable.
This is a big, we could talk.
This is a big topic
for just on this.
Yes,
for
I
4
touch
hours.
on it in the book a little bit as well, but I don't make it the focus, because what I'm really trying to do is I want to teach companies how to compete based upon creating value again, because in that way, I actually think you start the ball rolling. I don't think we're going to start the ball rolling by convincing the C-suite that they need to solve social problems. We need the C-suite to be convinced that they need to compete on value in creating their in executing their mission, and their mission is providing the value to customers. And then, of course, the returns, if you focus on that, the wealth is still created for the shareholders and the C-suite. But instead of focusing on the wealth, we focus on creating the value, and then everybody benefits.
So again, we could talk 5 more hours about this subject in particular. I'm glad the book touches on it. Brant, I'm honored that you asked me to do this. I hope everybody got what I got out of it, which is amazing conversation, amazing ideology that makes sense, that just makes sense. These are real problem-solving techniques. And I really want everybody to go out there and get this book. So how do they get it? How do they get in touch with you, Brant? How do they, what's the deal?
Yeah, so the link, we're doing this virtual tour in support of independent bookstores. And so there's a link in the YouTube there for people to buy the book from Tattered Cover. So I would really appreciate the support for these independent bookstores. I'm at brantcooper.com. I've got all sorts of other events going on, a summit in early November. And, I really encourage people to reach out to me. Brant at brantcooper.com is my email. I return all emails. I'm Brant Cooper on all social media. And so I want people to feel like they can reach out and be part of this conversation and see if we can get the change going. That's, that was one of the first questions you asked, Jason, is why do I do this? And it really is to empower people to live the lives that they want to live, which means, I'm totally on board. I think people want to go to work and they want to create value at work and they want to create meaningful change in society, and often through work is the best way to do it. And so let's go make the change at your work. It's true for other institutions that people belong to, whether it's nonprofits or political organizations or unions or other NGOs. All of these organizations need this mindset too. We all face uncertainty, and so we all have to use that childlike creativity and inspiration that we're born with. It's part of who we are as human beings, and we need to get that back. And so yeah, I mean that's it in a nutshell, man. Brant Cooper.
Fired up. Yeah, the summit that you're hosting, is there a link to it? Is there somewhere?
endlessdisruption.com.
Awesome. And listen, I'm honored, and Tattered Cover, thank you for this. But you have other book tours going on, right? So you'll be doing this virtually around?
Yeah. So I don't have the tour memorized, but I was in Miami a couple of weeks ago and LA, and we've got Seattle coming up, and first I think it's actually Lincoln, Nebraska, and then it's like what's awesome about this is I get to go to places that maybe I wouldn't normally go to. So I'm fired up to be in Nebraska, fired up, then Seattle, and we've got Boston coming up as well, and others. So just trying to spread the good word and sell some books and see if we can drive some change.
You're gonna. And I can't wait to be in person with you, man, and doing this live, back in the day.
We'll have to figure out when the in-person tour comes.
For sure. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all the questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody, but you could definitely email Brant. I'm sure he'll answer any question you guys have. And this has been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason, for jumping in and hosting. It's great to see you. And thanks everybody for joining. And again, reach out.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.